From mental health real talks to strategies that sell without the sleaze, this podcast is all about channeling your storytelling skills into marketing that works without losing your mind. Jessie, tell me about your week in books.
So I have three books on the go this week, which is kind of unusual for me because I normally have like just one fiction, one nonfiction. I'm pretty good about sticking to that. And if I'm not, then I very quickly realize that I can't keep up and I go back to just two. But I have three books on the go because I've been working my way through Seneca's Letters, Stoic philosopher, which is actually, it's just, there are a lot of like Stoic books out there, and I would very much like I want to go to the source kind of person. So that one I've been reading that for a few months, and it's nice to just read a letter and digest it and then move on. So that's been really good. But then my other books are The Knack of Selling Yourself by James T. Mangan, an older marketing book, which older marketing books are fun because they don't have all the tech gimmicks in them. And it's just like, I don't know, psychology and mindset and stuff like that, which is really awesome. And then I'm only just started that one, but I'm about 25% of the way through my fiction book at the moment, which is actually the book of one of my clients, Addison Horner, who is an awesome YA fantasy author. And I don't read YA that often, but his book Marrow and Soul has just like taken me back to like my childhood reading Emily Rodda. If there's any other Australians out there, she's a very successful Australian children's author, such good stories. And I feel like his work is taking me back to that. And I'm really, really enjoying it. So there's like a bit of variety. I feel like I don't have any rants this week. I'm just like, it's been a good week in book world. I'm enjoying myself. I got a bit of philosophy, I got a bit of marketing, and I've got an escapist fantasy. So it's good. I'm happy. How's your week in books?
Good. Yeah, I have like three books going. I always have like at least four, three to four, 12. Let me be honest. What I do like when I'm choosing a book is I'm like, I have to read a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of that. And then I finally choose. But right now, like one of my goals is just to get used to reading longer books because I am typically someone who like I want 350 and like we're out. Like that
Yeah,
would be my
I'm the
perfect.
same.
But Lucy's Score over here, all her
Oh,
books are freaking long as heck, and so are all of Kristen Hannah's books. So I was like, I'm going to challenge myself to read By a Thread and Firefly Lane, which
uh-huh.
is also a TV show on Netflix because I really want to watch that TV show, which is Kristen Hannah's book. And yeah, they're both like 580 pages about. Like, it's a little intimidating.
I don't know what it is about thicker books, but do you know what? Do you know, I tricked myself into reading thicker books by reading them on my Kindle. So North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell is like a fairly chunky book. I actually don't know how many pages it is, but I remember I read it on Kindle many years ago now and was like, I absolutely loved it, tore through it, obsessed with it, and then saw the book in the bookstore. I was like, oh my God, it's so thick. It's really huge. At the time, anyway, I actually haven't seen it in a while, so maybe I'm outing myself here as like thinking it's really massive and it wasn't. But I kind of feel you on that. I actually physically don't really like holding huge books either. So if I'm reading the physical hard copy, it annoys me and I just feel like it's too cumbersome and I don't, yeah, I'm a princess about it basically. So my trick is to just go on Kindle and don't think about the length because otherwise I have the exact same tendency as you. And I don't know why. It's something I've identified since I was quite young. Even like the thicker high fantasy books and stuff as a teenager, I was like, no, thank you. I like it like an average length book,
Yeah. I know
whatever
I'm
that
actually
is.
training for Mistborn because my husband really loves that series and was like, you got to read some of this Mistborn series. And I'm like, I cannot. Like, I got to chapter three and I was like, I'm already so bored. Can we? So I'm like, maybe if I read books that are like more in my comfort zone that are longer, I will get there. So that's what I'm working towards. And I'm sure somebody's going to be mad because my books all look like crap if they're this long because I can't read a book and make it look nice. Like, it's just
No,
not
I'm the same.
me.
I'm 100% the same. And the thicker it is, like, I don't like to be a spine cracker, but like sometimes you just have to. Otherwise, you're reading like this and it's no fun. It's no fun. Just like pages almost touching. But yeah, I love that you're in training for longer books. I think that's such a great idea. Maybe I need to train myself, be brave, pick up something that is just thick. I think for me also, I'm terrified of disappointment. Just, if I invest all of this time in this huge tome and it's crap, I'll be so disappointed.
Us. Book is like a little like back and forth for me because he's kind of like, I don't know, she sometimes writes in a way where I feel like this is a very misogynistic way to look at women and men's relationships.
Interesting.
Which I don't think she actually is a misogynist. Like she just like the how he thinks about sex and stuff like that. Weird and kind of creeps me out sometimes. I'm like, it's not it
Hmm.
for me. But
Hmm.
like their dynamic is cute, so it's keeping me interested. But I get the ick sometimes for sure.
How far into the book are you?
I am, let's see, we're at like 310 pages. So like a little more than
Okay.
half.
Okay. That's an impressive. I feel like that's you've committed. You've
Yeah.
committed. You're in there.
I didn't know what was gonna
Awesome.
happen for a while there because I kept being like, I don't want to read. I want to read
Yeah,
something else because I'm
I
rebelling.
guess it's I guess it's the pacing, isn't it? Like the longer book takes usually takes longer to get started. And like I don't know, I feel like I read a lot of novels that were published in the 60s and they were novels were really short back then. Like they're quite small. And so I think I've just got used to that pacing as well. And other times, genuinely, I've just had experiences where the longer book just wasn't worth it. And I was like, well, this could have been a shorter book. I say that as having never published a fiction book. Just gonna critique your pacing right there. But yeah, I love that. Today we were going to chat about our origin stories, which is an episode we're re-recording because I feel like we both were like we're not happy with the first recording. It's really tricky to talk about yourself, and I personally feel like I've told my story 3 gazillion times. So we're gonna like try and keep it interesting. But Hannah, I do really love like your well, I love that you are also an arts background person. You have like a theater background. I did a stint in musical theater and I'm a music teacher. Like I feel like that's really cool to have that sort of background in common. And I love the way that you have come to books. Um, so yeah, tell us like how you got here. I love your story.
Essentially, I started working for a theater and their PR director quit. And I was suddenly thrust into having to market a play and also do it on social media plus through print. And I was like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. So I had to learn both those skills at the same time, which, like you're still always learning a skill like that because it's always changing. But when I first learned it, I sold out the first production I ever did, and that was really, really cool. And it was mostly through Instagram stories. So that's like really how I became a social media manager was I was like, oh, these Instagram stories are working for me. What is this? Like, why is it working? And I figured out like eventually that that's because it's storytelling. Like essentially what Instagram stories are storytelling if you use them in a correct way. I mean, not
Hmm.
there's a bad way to use them, but if you use them in a way where you're like just showing your life throughout the day, that's really just telling a story all day.
Love that you're just like the way you started was just instant success. Like you clearly, I don't know, like had an inkling of how to tell stories effectively, like already. Because I mean, that's kind of like social media is a vehicle for stories, right? And I love that you just like dived in, baptism of fire, and then had an epic success. That makes me so happy.
And I mean, it hasn't always been that way. Like you
No, of
can
course
have
not. But I just think
you
that's so cool.
definitely not. I'm not saying I always sell out shows because like that's not the normal. Although we just closed Vagina Monologues and we sold out 5 out of 6 of those performances. So it does
Wow.
happen sometimes. It really like part of it is also just having good messaging. Like that's taught
Mm.
me so much about messaging, being able to do social media for theaters and then taking it into authorship. So like I had an author essentially ask me like I need help with my social media. Will you help me with it? And he had a publicist and that's how I became a social media manager for authors specifically was I was helping him and then the publicist hired me. Um,
Hmm.
but it was, like, such an interesting thing that, like, those 2 skills are so similar, like, really just talking
Mm.
about books and talking about plays, pretty darn similar.
Well, you're
Um,
talking about stories, right? You're selling people on a story, selling people on an interpretation of a story, getting people to engage with entertainment, right? Which is not a, a necessity. It's not like you need to go grocery shopping for entertainment every single week, but it's something that's so important to us. So I can completely see how that would cross over. What made you choose Instagram stories as the main mode out of interest?
So it was kind of accidental, to be honest.
Mhm.
Like, I just ended up going to a show, and I was there, like, helping, taking pictures and stuff, and I just ended up taking stories, like, just recording different parts of the play and stuff like that, and then that became part of, like, what I did for every show, and that helps us just sell out our shows when we can. I mean, obviously, it doesn't sell at every show because we do a lot of new works at that theater company, so, like, it doesn't sell at every single show because of that, and that's, like, kind of
Mm.
what you're contending with as an author too, so that's really interesting to see, like, new works and new books, like, especially new authors. Those 2 things are so similar, like, you have to do so much problem awareness, with both of them, like, people don't know that you are the solution for what they wanna read next if you're a new author,
This is true.
which is the same thing with a new play, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. What kind of made you make the switch over to working with authors full time rather than like staying in, I know you still do theater, but like rather than making theater the full-time kind of social media gig. What was it about authors that intrigued you?
Because I was not actually full-time in theater, I was a preschool teacher at the time, and I was like, "I'm never gonna make money off of preschool teaching." Love preschool teachers, it is so much fun, like, I loved teaching theater to kids too, and that was part of it, was like I would teach theater to kids in the summer and then teach preschool in the fall, and that was essentially, like, every year. I just couldn't, like, forever be in the same position, and
Mm.
I didn't once I got hired at the publicist, I was like, "Wait, I can make literally twice as much and actually use, like, part of my college degree? That'd be great."
Yeah. What's your college degree in?
It's in theater, but, like, I it was a writing intensive school, so essentially we wrote a lot, so
Hmm.
I was just used to writing anyway, and my family's all writers, which I haven't really spoke of yet, but, I grew up in the publishing world essentially, not directly, but, like, my uncle was a big publisher in New York. I have to look this up because I never remember who he's published. Gilbert Seldes was his dad, who he was a big theater guy. Yeah, he published a bunch of different authors back in the day, but Saul Bellow was one of them, which I think is probably his biggest name,
Mm,
and my aunt is also an author, she's written over 36 books, and my dad's an
that's
author, so
phenomenal.
and my
Did
cousins.
you did you intentionally try to avoid the author world initially, coming
Mhm.
from all of these publishers and authors?
Yeah, I in fact did. I was like, I don't actually I didn't I didn't fall in love with it until later, you know, really, like, I didn't even I loved books as a child, but I wouldn't say I was, like, a huge bookworm in my 20s. It
Mm.
really came back, like, in my late 20s.
Yeah. It's funny how like I was always a huge reader as a kid and through my teens, and then I kind of fell out of love with it when I went to university because there's so many readings you have to do while you're studying. And I was a stress head and I just found that I wasn't able to compartmentalize my time. And if I sat down to read a book, I was stressing that I wasn't doing my university work. Really don't recommend that way of living. But I noticed when, after I got into book blurbs, which we'll get into in a little bit, but just being around that many authors and people who are really, really excited about reading really helped me to get excited about reading again. Like I was just because like reading is kind of like I feel like that's a huge part of my identity. And there was just something about the hustle and grind of just going to like full-time work and all that kind of stuff. I fell out of love with it for a bit. And then just being able to be surrounded by bookish people has just been the most fun. The most fun. I feel like it's brought my reading back to life.
Oh, I completely agree, and I mean, like, just knowing that there's different types of books too, like, I feel like for so long when I was a younger adult, I thought, like, YA was the only place I really lived, like, I could
Mm.
live.
Mm, that's really interesting. Yeah, and that's true, is that our reading identities kind of like shift as we grow up, right? You're reading really different stuff by the time you're in your 20s than what you were, maybe reading as a kid. And I think it might have taken me a while to sort of find what I enjoyed reading as an adult. That might have been part of it as well. Because like I say, I read everything as a kid and a teenager. And then yeah, when I hit my 20s, it slowed down. And now I feel like I'm in a place where I really know what I love to read again, which is cool. Um, is there anything you wanted to add to your origin story?
I mean, I've helped over 200 authors at this point, so that's
That's
cool.
awesome.
And done over 30 shows, so that's fun. But I mean, like, honestly, with when it comes to origin stories, I feel so awkward always talking about myself, and I think this should be said in this episode because I think authors struggle with this too. Like, I just was
Yeah.
editing one of my clients' bios and her bio was perfectly fine. Like
Mm,
she literally
mm,
has like, I went to Columbia and I went to Harvard in her bio. And she's like, what's wrong?
yeah.
My bio doesn't feel good enough. And it's like,
Mm,
I can't say I went to Columbia and Harvard. Like
yeah.
that's impressive alone, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I think we have to remember that
Yeah.
like we're the biggest critics of our own story. And at the end of the day, everyone thinks we're more interesting than we do, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And like I say, I feel like I've told my story a gazillion times because I've been on a reasonable number of podcasts. Um, but I suppose like the short story is that I got into blurbs by accident. Like you, I'm a teacher by trade originally, but I was in high school education. I started teaching when I was 17. So I'm a music teacher. So I was a music teacher. I haven't been a music teacher for about 18 months now. It's so weird. It's so weird to me. Um, but I have taught ages like 3 through to 93, I think he was by the time he left. Beautiful older gentleman who was so enthusiastic about music. And it was a really, really huge part of who I was for like all through my 20s, basically, all through my 20s. And blurbs were the reason that I gave up teaching because I just had so many blurbs to write that I was like, well, I guess we're moving on to the next thing now, which is super exciting. But what kind of, my undergraduate degree was in music. What all of that kind of doesn't show is that writing was always a huge undercurrent in my life. I was obsessed with writing as a kid. I actually almost went into journalism instead of music. And I think part of me recognized that I didn't want to do that kind of writing. I wanted to be creative. I really wanted to be creative and I didn't want to let go of that creativity. So I'm still really, really, really glad that I did my music degree and I actually minored in journalism. And pretty much straight out of that degree, I managed to get a job with one of our national newspapers here as a music critic, which was like dream come true territory. I'd always wanted to see my name in print in this, it was a broadsheet at the time. And I did that for the best part of 10 years, like on a freelance basis. And having for a good chunk of that time, my reviews were in the paper every single week. And these are like high end reviews. They expected quite a lot of us as a fairly educated audience. And I remember just thinking, like, oh my gosh, like this, like I loved my music teaching, but I was just like, getting my name in print was so addictive. And funnily enough, the reviews that I was being asked to write were 200 words, which is more or less the average word count of your average book blurb. They're a little bit shorter these days, so I tend to stick to 150, 180. But for years, like best part of a decade, I was actually training myself in writing about art in an incredibly concise way with this very, very precise word limit. Like you literally had to count your hyphenated words as 2 words. They wouldn't give you a word more. Like when it's 200 words, it's 200 words. That's it. I had a few other kind of writing gigs along the way, one of which was again for music reviews, but this time it was 75 words. It was a it was a 4x4 magazine, like literally about like off-road driving. But they were like, we want to put music reviews in of like music that people would like to drive to. And then it was my job to make that selection. And I put 4 reviews in a month that were each 75 words. And that is possibly some of the toughest writing I've ever done, like to get a music review of an entire album down to 75 words. But I did become really obsessed with concise writing. Whenever I did like my assignments and things, I was often in the 10% under word count. I don't know if you guys do the same thing, but in Australia, when you're
Oh yeah.
submitting assignments, they're often like 10% over, 10% under is what they'll allow for the word count. I was often like underneath or look bang on. So I was really obsessed with like shaving things down as much as I possibly could. And so in 2020, I was working as a high school teacher 4 days a week and I had my Wednesdays off. And I was like, you know what? I want to do some more writing. Like I've done writing my whole life. Why don't I do a little bit extra? I became really in love with this idea of writing in cafes. I really wanted to be able to do that. And so on Wednesdays I would take myself to a cafe and I got onto fiverr.com and literally my first thought was book blurbs because two reasons. One, my fiance had just self-published a few books on the Latin, learning Latin. And so I'd seen him go through that process and I had seen him have to write the blurb and all that kind of stuff. And my second reason was that my rationale was book blurbs are short, this will be easy. And that's such a funny kind of mentality to me now, knowing how much pain book blurbs cause authors and how hard it is to get your, 100K book into 150 words. But genuinely, I got into it because I was like, this will be easy. And you know what? It was for me in a lot of ways. I mean, I had a lot to learn and I genuinely was making stuff up as I sort of went along. But I think my comfort zone has always been short form writing. And I was very fortunate on Fiverr to actually, they bumped me up to the top of the list because my very first order got a 5-star review. And they bumped me up to the top because if you've ever been on Fiverr, there's just thousands of people doing the same thing on there. And there were lots of people doing book blurbs. And then they assigned me this mentor guy for 6 months. And he was like, you've been chosen for this mentor program. I was like, is this a scam? But it wasn't. We hopped on a Zoom call. He was just like, well, we've identified you as a really great seller. We want to boost you. We want to give you some extra help. And so it kind of took off from there. And I made an amount of money I was not expecting. And I was charging $20 a blurb back then. Like just like almost 10 times cheaper than I am now. And I was just learning on the job. And I wrote the equivalent of one blurb every single day for 7 months straight. That was my apprenticeship, basically, in every possible genre: hydroponic gardening, spicy romance, everything in between. And it was the absolute best apprenticeship. The authors were so grateful and so lovely to work with. And it was from them that I started to hear this narrative of, well, two things. One was, I struggle to write the blurb myself. This is so difficult. Thank you for doing it. And the other one was, oh my gosh, you're like the fourth blurb writer I've gone to. You're the first one to get it right. Thank you so much. So I realized that I was like, oh, I've accidentally fallen into this niche where a lot of help is needed.
Yeah.
And so at the end of 2020, I was offered full-time work at my school the following year. So I thought, well, I can't be doing this. I was up to all hours writing blurbs most nights. And I was like, I can't be doing this. I'm gonna do what I know I can do, and I'm going to teach a course. Like I'm a teacher, that's what I do. I'll make a course. And it took a few months to get people in the course. There was several months of just crickets and me thinking that nothing was going to happen. But by the end of 2021, there was enough interest that I decided to go back into writing custom blurbs for people. And it kind of skyrocketed from there to the point where at the end of 2022, I quit my teaching job completely. I was part time in 2022 because I said to my boss, I got too many blurbs to write. You can have me 2 days a week. And then it eventually took over and has been just the most fun. But essentially, I mean, much like you, I got here by accident, but also again, like you, the skills that I sort of developed through my life doing things that I enjoyed kind of all came together and magically culminated in this job, which is just such a weird job to explain to people. It's hard enough telling people I was a music teacher. Some people look at you sideways for that. Trying to explain I'm a blurb writer and then most people don't know what a blurb is. And it's really, really fun. And yeah, that's why I'm here.
Yeah, that's so cool. What did you learn? What do you feel like your biggest lessons when you wrote that many at a time were? Because like it feels like I've learned so much just through writing content daily, and it is
Mm,
such an interesting thing when you just keep repeating it over and over.
yeah, gosh. No one's ever asked me that question before. It's a really good question. I think the biggest thing I had to learn, and I mean, I feel like nonfiction and fiction have their own kind of learning curves as well, because I wrote a lot of both. I think with nonfiction, what I mostly had to learn was a lot of the nonfiction authors were writing about stuff that had already been written about, like things that people could learn from anywhere else. So it was about learning to see what unique offering they brought in the way that they teach it or tell it, their experience, etc., and actually highlighting that in their blurb. Like, why should we want to learn from them? And that's something that was really set me in good stead, I think, because being able to pinpoint that uniqueness about somebody's book is essential to being able to market it in an interesting and engaging way. With fiction authors, I feel like fiction blurbs are such a an exercise in creative writing, and I really feel like I had to learn to very quickly distill. There's a risk of sounding a little bit woo, like the vibe of the book, the actual kind of feel of it. And I firmly believe that's the reason why I had clients coming back to me and back to me, back to me is that for whatever reason, when I kind of sit there and read the synopsis, something I've identified as being quite good at is that I can find the little vibe inside of it and then highlight that in the blurb. And it's one thing usually. It's that one thing that I build the whole blurb around. And I find it really difficult to actually describe the way that I do that. I've very successfully taught, I think there's over 500 authors now in Book Blurb Magic, like the course, which is really, really cool. So like that course has really great results and people consistently come back and like, yes, I got it. But I think as an outsider coming to the book, like as the author, if you're writing your blurb, you know what that vibe is. You know, often know, even without knowing, it'll come out as you start to write the blurb, so long as you have the right structures and things in place, which is what I teach. But as an outsider coming to the blurb, as someone who hasn't written that book, I think yeah, really had to learn to quickly latch onto the magic of that book. Hence my name, I guess, Book Blurb Magic.
Nice. Love that. Yeah. I think with like the music background too, it does kind of make sense to me to go from that to that. Because I
Mm,
know like book blurbs, like music is short and book blurbs are short. Like essentially you have to be able to get it into the same kind of cadence almost.
that's really true. I've never really seen much of a link other than I think like my music criticism work really prepared me well to write about art, I guess, of different genres. But even that was pretty different. Trying to, it almost feels like being a translator. Like you're taking something and you are describing it to people. Like this is what it is, and then they can decide if they're interested.
Yeah.
And that's not a job that I take lightly because you want to get the translation right.
I know, and
But it's
it's
fun.
a very interesting skill because like I could never be the book blurb person essentially because I'm just not that witty. Like
I'm
like
not
I
sure
can
that
come
my
up with
blurbs are witty.
short
I
like
don't know.
things for like video content, but you ask me to like do a slogan, I'm out.
Yeah, look, and I mean, I will say the hook, right? Like the headline of the blurb, which is the wittiest, the snappiest, the shortest, most, marketing candy part of the book blurb, almost always takes me the longest. Unless there's like a bolt of lightning that hits my head and I'm just like, I've got the idea for it straight off. And sometimes it happens. Sometimes it drops out of the sky. There's no other way I can kind of think to describe it. Just the experience all comes together and it's like, boom, my brain's done it for me. But most of the time it's me staring at the wall, being like, why did I do this? I can't do this. What am I talking about? And then it'll just appear. And that's something that is also like really rewarding, but it is always the hardest part. But I do love, I suppose, short sentences, and I love if I can describe three sentences in one sentence, then I'm going to do it. If I can do that, then I'm really happy. So to me, that's the exciting part. And it is in many ways like the opposite skill you need to write a book. When you're writing a book, you need to be like, I'm going to write lots of sentences about this. Not to be unnecessarily verbose, but just to get all of your ideas out there. I'm often sitting there just like straining over one sentence sometimes. And it's a very different mindset. And authors absolutely can learn to switch mindsets and to write their own blurbs. That's the reason that I have a course because I was like, this is absolutely possible. But it can be a struggle if that's not what you're used to. Anyway, that's how I got here. I hope that you guys enjoyed listening to how we got here, the great accidental convergence of circumstances that got us to where we are.
And before we go, I just think it'd be fun to ask this before we go.
Mm.
What instrument or like what is your main thing in music that you do?
Oh yeah. Duh. I always forget to tell people this. People always like, but what do you play? I'm a classical pianist, a very out of practice classical pianist at this point in time. But that is my background. I'm also serviceable on guitar, mostly as like I can accompany people. I love guitar's like my relaxing instrument. That's pretty much it. That's it. That's I played percussion in an orchestra for a while, which was insane fun. Cymbals, just hitting things that make lots of noise. Great fun. Not a trained percussionist, need to put that out there, but had a very fun, untrained time.
I was so bad at I was so bad at piano in college. So like instruments are just a certain skill that I just yeah, not my thing. But yeah, I do classical theater mostly, like Shakespeare and like we do a lot of new works as well. But no
That's so
musicals.
cool.
I'm not a musical theater person, so
But I feel like there are so many parallels between our backgrounds, though. It's like you've got the teaching, the theater slash, stage art, if you will, and now books, right?